Hello, this is Evan Rogerson, and I'm Motor Gang here, and today we're going to go over the 1.1 version game manual update which dropped earlier today, adding 18 new pages of content. Most of the rule changes aren't really big. I expect that'll be reserved for the 2.0 game manual update dropping in September. However, they did go ahead and drop the Vex AI rules, which is what most of this video is probably going to be related to. So before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to please the YouTube algorithm. And also, I apologize if my mic quality sounds a little bit weird as I'm not using my usual setup. Alright, so first rule change. Basically, I don't know why, because usually they don't put like significant Q&As in like the changelog, but they did for this one. I didn't notice anything weird with the wording up here, but basically, if blocks accidentally fall out of the field due to like accidental interactions, that's not considered a violation, which is pretty big because at MOA and my Kansas tournament that I hosted earlier this year, there were definitely plenty of times where robots would ram into the loaders and blocks would go flying out the top. I think the most I ever saw was a robot ram into one that was full, had 6 blocks into it. The top 3 all just went falling out and outside of the field. So it makes sense you're not going to penalize teams for that. But like I said, this has already been in the Q&A for a little bit, so not really a huge thing to have here. Next up, SG9 does have 2 changes. One of them was already in the Q&A. This is SG9E, that point right there. As you can see, this didn't even exist in the old game manual. And that used to say that basically now that you can only add blocks to loaders that contain 5 or fewer blocks. So if the loader has 5 blocks, you can put one in, but when there's 6 in, then you cannot put any extra blocks in. So this used to be in the Q&A, but now it's officially in the game manual, probably good. So no having 7 blocks in your loaders. Next up, they do go ahead and say that during this action, drive team members' hands, which is members' hands previously, and now kind of to bust into like an English nerd. Members with the apostrophe before the S means that it's singular, but it's possessive singular. By having the apostrophe after the S, that means that it's plural possessive, meaning you can have multiple drive team members breaking the plane at once, which previously you could not do. Cool how much of an implication it changes just based on moving the apostrophe. So previously, yes, under the strictest interpretation of the rules, you could only have one person loading at once. Now you can have multiple. And before it was just members hand, singular. Now it is hands, plural. So previously you could only have one hand breaking the plane. Now you can have multiple members with multiple hands all inside. So really this would mean you could have like 4 hands going at once, one person driving, 2 people on each team loading, which is going to be plenty fast. I doubt we're going to see any robots that are going so fast that you would want even more than that going all at once. Because by the time that you get one hand back in, you're pretty much going to be good to go at that point, and you could always get your alliance partner to help you if you really needed it. Next up, they did add some clarifications to the control zone tape specifications. You can see right here, the gap between the two things is 11.8 inches, and you can see that they very much want it right up against the edge of the plastic. So first of all, I think it's good that they clarified this, because like, yes, you do not want any gap there or else it can get unfair. However, I do think that it should be moved even a little bit further out, maybe to like the outside of the tape edge and not just the inside of it. The reasoning for that is this is someone posted this and I actually got to see it in person. Power Beans, this was going to be the world record skill score for driver skills. I don't know if they ended up putting something better than this afterwards or if but anyways, this would have been the world record skill score if they had gotten the control bonus in that long goal. And for skills, so you do need to have 3 blocks in the control bonus for it to count, all of the same color. These 2 blocks are in, but that block you can kind of see is just ever so slightly out, as well as that block being ever so slightly out. Really, I think that this needs to be like 12.75 inches, or at least like 12.7 inches. That way it's super, super hard for something like this to not count as the control bonus. Because, like, what are you going to do in this position? Like, they have the blocks around it. Like this feels and looks like it should be a control bonus. All the blocks are touching. There's not any gaps. They very much should, I feel like, get the control bonus, but as the way the rules are currently written, they now lose 5 points for skills, and because of this, they didn't get the world record driver skill score in this attempt. So I feel like that's something that really needs to be changed. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues, gameplay wise. Like I feel like gameplay wise, all the rules are pretty solid, but it's just that I don't know, that just doesn't feel good because like if that's how you lose, that kind of sucks. So, I don't love that. Yeah, there's probably going to be a team that misses worlds because something like this stupid happens to them. So I don't love that. And of course, I don't love expansion, but I doubt they're changing it at this point. Now, moving on, we're going to go ahead and break down the Vex AI game manual section. So this is all brand new, and they've definitely done a lot of work to improve it, I think, based on stuff they did last year. So I'm definitely a big fan of most of these changes, so let's go ahead and get into them. So the first thing here is just the yap, 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 Vex AI, you can't like drive your robots, yada, yada, yada. And they do say here that like, yeah, they're open to suggestions on how these rules change and evolve. because they were very clear on Discord, some members of the GDC, that like, hey, these are new things. We spent a lot more time going into these, and it does show that they put a lot more time and effort into this game, Vex AI than they did in the last previous years. So I think that overall that's like a good thing. And some interesting things here is this line right here. So we do have Vex AI divisions at select Vex U events, which I think is interesting. And then this is something that was here last year, is teams to submit robot skills challenges at local V5RC events. That's something Vex U has similar procedures. I know that I think they're looking at changing those based on some emails that I sent them. But that is interesting that at select Vex U events, they might have VAIRC. Maybe like, I don't know if these are just like showcase events or if you could run like something where you just go straight to eliminations without doing a full like qualification bracket and judging and whatnot. So I think that's kind of interesting. We'll get to these things kind of later, but basically just some things to know are the interaction period is like basically driver control. You can cross the line and do stuff. And the isolation period is basically the term for autonomous because duh, the whole thing's autonomous, so not really any difference there. But basically that's when you cannot cross the line. And I do think it's interesting when you look at the setup here that they have the regular VRC tape lines and they don't have the VexU tape lines. I'm wondering if there's at some point they're going to add something. I'll probably send them an email like, hey, can you, because they said they might run Vex AI stuff at Vex U events, so would it be okay to use still the Vex U tape lines, which go out and have like a hexagon in the middle? But basically, if we look at this field setup, it looks very different than all the other setups. So it's mostly 3 stacks of blocks you can kind of see right here, and the loaders are alternating colors. Additionally, there aren't any match loads. All of the blocks start on the field. So I think there's a couple of cool things to note from this field setup that they have right here. So first of all, no match loads I think is good for AI because it would be very easy to just build a robot that just as the loader loads up with like what you get like 12 match loads for VRC plus the 3 that already started in there plus your preloads. So you could get like 16 blocks all just in your loader and then back up and just score them all in the long tube, which that doesn't require much coding skill. You just need to build a decent robot and you can do that. Now you can't do that because I mean, even if you just sit at the loader and you have color sort, you're only going to get 3 blocks plus your preloads, maybe 4. So it's a lot harder to just like load up on the loaders and go. So I do like that change a lot, and I think that's going to make things a lot better. Additionally, the blocks, the way that the GDC said this is because it's to get like some element of random while still being fair. The expectation is when your robot rams into these blocks, they're going to go everywhere and it's not going to be predictable how they fall, but that's still fair. So it's not like we have different field setups for different matches because like if you change the field setup constantly between each every match, some teams might just do better on one field setup here. But here I don't think it's really unfair to say that oh the blocks fell over weird. Like I mean, yeah, they're gonna fall over weird. That's kind of the expectation, and then you're gonna have to go like maybe that bottom block will stay in the same spot. But if you want these extra blocks, that's like 2/3 of the blocks. They're gonna be scattered all over the field, and you are going to actually need to use AI to go and find these. You're not just gonna be able to like know where these blocks are at all points in time. And again, something one of the GDC members said is yes, you could maybe build something that grabs all 3 blocks at once, but they're fairly precarious, and that would require a lot of building skill at least. And then it's basically going to be impossible for these 3 stacks right here so maybe teams will figure it out in some capacity, but I think mostly it's going to be the blocks are kind of scattered all over the place, which I think will be real interesting. Also, thing to note, if when you're on the red alliance, most of the time the blue blocks are on the bottom. So if the top blocks scatter, which are the ones you need, because like red is up there, you're still going to have to go and hunt these down. So I think that's interesting, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out, given that there's only a 15-second autonomous period or isolation period, because like by the time that like you knock these over and go and find a couple blocks, I think your loaders are probably your best bet for auto just because there's at least 3 blocks right there. But you do need more than that for the win point. So I'll kind of get into that a bit later. I don't love that. I think it's a little bit too challenging. And yeah, basically the scoring is different. So auto is worth 10, which it is for regular match play, but then blocks scored are worth 3. Control bonuses are worth 10 all across the board. We'll get into the new control bonuses in a little bit. And robot parking is worth 10. And we'll get into why it has to be the 24-inch robot in a little bit too. So basically the control bonuses are, instead of being like inside one goal, they're now these edges. So in order to get the yellow control bonus, you would need one of your color blocks to be the furthest out on that goal. So if we scroll back down to like this picture right here, this goal would be considered like this section, this outer section, which is considered on the outside of the tape lines. This would be considered controlled by red, which I think is quite interesting. And then they said for the center goals, basically it's whoever has the one furthest out, and if there's just one block in there, then it's considered both. Like you could have the yellow and the blue one controlled by one red block. Then you would need one red block there and one red block right there. And then nothing matters for these center areas, which I think is kind of weird. It's the opposite of VRC, but I think it all makes sense from a gameplay wise. Like I was saying earlier with the camping and just like loading up and then going to score, you could easily get a bunch of blocks all in one goal. I think by forcing you to get control bonuses by scoring across multiple goals, I think that's going to be a lot better for gameplay just because it forces robots to be moving around in order to get the control bonuses, which really incentivizes teams to actually be using AI. Like for AI last year, the team that won, they just did like a tier 3 hang with high stake and they just were able to sit up there because no robot is good enough at AI yet to be able to just do that off of rings. So I think that's interesting because, you know, teams can't just like sit at a long goal. They actually need to be moving around and scoring. If you just sit at a long goal, you're not going to get any control bonuses. First of all, you're not going to get many blocks if you're not moving around to pick them up, and you're not going to get many control bonuses. So I think overall that's pretty interesting and probably a good change. So yeah, like I said, this would be considered controlled by red. Nothing in the center matters. Then in order to be parked, you have to park with your 24-inch robot. And I guess for this is so that double park doesn't exist anymore because double park 30 points for an AI match, 30 points might be considered a lot of points. Like that means scoring 10 blocks, which is going to be more challenging for some of the AI teams to do. So I think by saying only one robot can park and eliminating double park, first of all, now one of your robots should still be doing things on the field. You can't just like go and park super early with one of your robots because at least one robot should still be out doing things. So you need to code something probably for an end game last second trying to get the control bonuses. And then double park, you don't get those massive amount of points if you can only have one robot park. So basic other thing. Oh, the win point criteria. Yeah, I'll go ahead and cover that. Um, so interesting. They need 9 blocks scored, which is more than VRC, but I think it's less than Vex UI. I haven't looked at the Vex UI rules in a while. For matches, I've been looking at skills mostly. And then basically it's the standard get off your control barrier, get 3 goals, but get 9 blocks. Now 9 blocks, I think in 15 seconds is going to be quite challenging. So just the way that the field is set up. Let me kind of pull that up here. So yeah, you get your preload and assume both robots go out, go to the match loaders, load up. That still gives each robot only 4 blocks of their color. So you need to get one of these extra blocks. And I think by the time that you try and knock one of these over, find it and then go to score. Not to mention you have to be scoring across 3 separate goals. I think that's a lot for a team to be doing in AI in only 15 seconds. And I don't think you're going to see very many teams doing that. So I don't know. I think that's probably one of my small critiques gameplay wise, is I think the AWP or I guess IWP. I think it's a little bit too challenging just the way that the field is set up because I get that they want teams going out and hunting these down, but with only 15 seconds, I think that's going to be rather challenging to do. And I do like the change from 15 away from 30 because then you can't, like, again, for Vex AI Worlds last year for high stakes, just climb and auto was what won because you had whole 30 seconds without your opponents having to worry about interacting with you. By making it so there's less that you can just pre-program because now you have to start worrying about your opponents interacting with you, I think that is a good thing. But I just think 9 is, at least for now, maybe a little bit too much, and I would probably lower that down to maybe like 7. 7 I think is still a good number. Just at least for early season, maybe bump that up for Worlds depending on how things go. Again, you still have to follow the rules, so, like don't hold, and the referees can tell you to disable your robot. Like if you're pinning another robot for like 15 seconds straight, then you can be disabled mid-match and also DQ'd. Different expansion. Now I do kind of love this. Basically, each robot, I think that's 3 feet, not 3 inches. I don't know. I don't like Imperial, but so basically you can expand up to 36 inches, which is like that's a lot. That's like an extra foot off of one robot and a foot and 1 inch off of another one. So I think that that's kind of cool. But within this expansion, you can only put like 2 inch cylinder with a camera on top. And this isn't allowed to interact with anything. So basically, robots are allowed to have a camera on top looking down on the field, which I think is really cool because that's going to help like now, I mean, there's nothing like last year you wanted to be able to fit under the barriers. There's nothing here that stops you from just having like a camera pointed down like 3 feet in the air, looking at everything. So I think that's pretty cool because that'll probably help teams with like actually being able to look at the objects and see where they are. So I think that's a really cool change, and I like the way that they worded it. It's quite clever. And then for loaders, you can only use the max loaders for if blocks fall out of the field. You cannot use them for like max loading, which again I already covered earlier on in the video. I think that's good because you can't just sit at the max loader and load up with blocks and then go ahead and score a bunch. Now skills, I don't love the Vex AI skills as much as I do the max play. I think max play, other than like IWP being a little bit too hard, I think that I really like it. But even then, IWP doesn't determine things for like eliminations, and honestly, your ranking probably doesn't really matter for Vex AI because like it's like Vex U rankings, except there aren't very many Vex AI tournaments that are actually going to have teams missing elims, and if you're winning matches, you're probably going to make elims anyway. Now, the interesting thing about skills, I don't love it because a robot that is good for matches is very different than a robot that's good for skills. I kind of liked it back when it was just like the same as Vex U, or at least if it were the same setup as it was for like uh, Vex AI matches, because this just seems like a lot. And like the robots that would be good for skills are like completely different than the ones that would be good for matches. I would rather do like Vex U skills or just regular skills rules on this setup. I think that would be a lot better. So some things for skills, yeah, different setup. And then you start with the 24-inch robot in the blue zone and the 15-inch robot in the red zone. And I think that they have to park in the opposite zones in order to be counted for points. So that's cool. I mean, you can't just like do what I did with the cheesy double park where you put both your robots in one park zone. They now need to drive across the field in order to park for Vex AI. So I think that's good. You can't cheese it there. But some interesting things here are like you only get the points for whichever block you have the most of. So if you have 7 red blocks and 5 blue blocks, you only get points for the red blocks, which I think, yeah, that's good. But basically, that's not really a coding challenge as long as you have like good color sort, which like I think teams are going to have anyways. And then I don't like that there's an equal number, then none of the blocks will receive points. I would rather it just be like the same because it feels like you could just mess up a little bit and get screwed over by that. Although probably you're going to be closer to like 7 and maybe like 1 block accidentally slipping through. Again, if you have a good color sort, I don't think that's much of an issue. Now the other things are you get points for having blocks inside the bullseyes, which are like these, they're the things on the markings right here. So if you get a block inside of there, that's 3 points, which counts as scored. I don't feel like that's worth a lot of points. I don't know. Maybe that's just kind of, I don't know. I just don't get that, I guess, like what the point behind that is. Like it's just, there's only 4 of them, and I think they were only worth like 3 points. Yeah, which is like the same that's like a regular block scored on a goal is, and you think that would be like quite hard to line them up. Like the blocks like to roll. So like I don't know, I don't like that per se. And then yeah, some other weird things are you get points for putting blocks into the loaders, which is weird. So you get points like for putting blue blocks in the loaders adjacent to the blue park zone, which if you go and look back at like the field setup, there aren't any blue blocks adjacent to the blue park zone. Well, actually, there's one at the top. So I guess, I mean, even if you don't move, you still will get like a skill score of like 12 for having 3 blocks across 4 different goals. I don't know. But basically, yeah, you want to put blue blocks in the blue zone, which I don't love because like there's nothing in match play that would make you want to like shove blocks into the loaders like from the bottom pushing up. So like I don't maybe for a 24-inch robot you can maybe just score them in from the top. I'm not exactly sure if that's legal. I'd have to check. Probably going to have to Q&A that. But basically that just seems like weird because that's just such a thing that robots aren't designed to do. So like you would have to build like a specialized Vex AI skills robot. So I don't love that. But other than that, I think that's like my biggest gripe with this. Um, and yeah, control bonuses don't count for skills, which I think is fine, but I don't know. And then you get a special bonus if you put like all 6 blocks in the loader. Like you can see right here. Yeah, so if you just fill it with all the blocks, you get 5 points, which that's just it's weird because like same with the bullseye, like these aren't things that robots are built to do for match play, so you're gonna have like very much skills focused robots and very much match play focused robots, and I don't love that. Um, and then rules, it's standard Vex U rules, so 1v1, and then you can use like custom parts and stuff. So you can like 3D print for Vex AI and everything like that. I think that kind of wraps up my thoughts on Vex AI. And then as a result, I guess the game manual as a whole. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe in order to please the YouTube algorithm, and I will see you in the next one.